generic name because some of them don't have a stomach to digest and just use the species as fertilizers. Marcel thinks they use people as fertilizers, but Chuck thinks she's worrying too much because it's just the second level and people would notice if there were corpses around. They need to defeat the plants to get their fruits, so Marcel steps forward, ready to cast her spell. But Senshi interrupts her, and a plant suddenly grabs her. Senshi advises her not to use magic to avoid harming the fruits, since they can only take what they will eat. A body suddenly comes out of one of the plants, and Marcel complains to Lias, saying they have a stomach for digestion. But he explains that it depends on the species, and the one that caught her is parasitic, so it puts seeds in the skin. She starts yelling at him, so he decides to help her, attacking its roots, and he helps her up, wondering what it was like to be held by the plant. He explains that this type of plant needs to keep its prey alive, so it hugs them tightly, but without hurting, thinking it must be kind of cozy, but Marcel finds this disturbing. They go inside the tree to cook their meal, and Senshi starts preparing a broth. Lias thinks about planting the seeds of the man-eating plants, but Marcel throws them in the fire because it's a stupid idea. Senshi adds more fruits to the broth, and when the meal is ready, Lias and Chuck decide to give it a try, and they're surprised by the taste. They encourage Marcel to eat it, and when she tries it, she admits that it's really good. This makes her curious, and she wonders why the plants make fruits that will be eaten by others. So Lias explains that they use these fruits as bait for their prey, and Marcel is surprised by how smart they are. Lias is happy that she's becoming more interested in the subject, and they clean the place up, but they wonder what they should do with the body. They decide to leave it in the open, so that others can take it when they go to the surface, and the image is a bit disturbing, but they don't seem to care. Marcel has a dream, where she's happy with her mother preparing their dishes, but it soon turns into a nightmare, when she sees that all the food has turned into monsters. Marcel wakes up, and she smells something cooking, so Chuck reveals that another party is cooking breakfast. They're eating normal food, so she gets jealous because she wants to have some pork. Senshi feels sorry for them, thinking today's adventurers aren't concerned about a balanced diet, but he admits that their meals aren't perfect. He tells Marcel that what she wants isn't pork, but fat, and she tells him that she just doesn't want to eat monsters anymore. Senshi has already decided, and resolves that they need to hunt monsters rich in fat, or something like an egg, which would be even better, because it's incredibly nutritious. Lias realizes something, asking Senshi if he's thinking the same thing as him, about a creature known as a basilisk, which has the torso of a chicken and the tail of a snake. Chuck tries to cheer up Marcel, since she likes chicken meat, but she can't understand how he can call that a chicken. Lias starts to fantasize about basilisk meat, because he always wanted to compare it with a cockatrice, while the other two find his wishes strange. They continue walking until they find a basilisk nest, and they decide to take the eggs before their mother returns. Marcel finds the eggs strange, but they suddenly hear the scream of the basilisk, and they see other adventurers being chased by it. The party hides while they see the adventurers getting cornered, but the basilisk spots Marcel, so she runs for her life, while the others watch and criticize her maneuvers. When Marcel falls and finds herself in danger, Lias comes to her rescue. But he makes his most intimidating pose, while making strange noises and waving his arms to look bigger, leaving his team ashamed. The basilisk doesn't have a blind spot, but Senshi and Lias decide to attack from both sides, leaving the basilisk confused, and they're able to defeat it. They go to check the members of the other party, and we see that one of them has been poisoned. Senshi reveals that he has the antidote, but he doesn't want to give it, because he's planning to use it for a recipe. The others are shocked, but he explains that it's more effective if cooked anyway, and Marcel tells him to start cooking. They start plucking the chicken and gathering the ingredients for the meal, while the man's health continues to decline, but Senshi doesn't care. He stuffs the bird with vegetables and roasts the chicken at a low temperature. When it's finally ready, the party feeds the man, and despite his condition, he admits that it's really delicious. Marcel knows that she needs to cast a healing spell, but is distracted by the chicken leg. After a few bites, Marcel finally remembers that she needs to use the spell, and they enjoy the rest of the meal together. When they finish, the man explains how they always get stuck on the same monsters, so he wants to know how to get stronger. The party doesn't know what to say, but Senshi steps forward and explains that there are 3 rules: having a good nutrition, engaging in proper exercise, and never skipping sleep. They're impressed by his knowledge, and they bid each other farewell. As the party proceeds deeper into the dungeon, Chuck uses his skills to find secret passages and avoid traps. He leads the party and asks them to follow his instructions, as Chuck shows them the safest paths, but Senshi ends up activating a trap. Chuck scolds Senshi for failing to pay attention, ordering him to follow instructions, but Senshi intentionally triggers a series of traps. He's impressed by the different types of traps, and Chuck tells him to step back as he explains how the oil trap works. But Senshi can only think about frying, asking Chuck to introduce him to the container where the oil for the trap is stored, and Chuck tries to explain that it wasn't made for cooking, but Senshi insists. So Chuck agrees, but only if Senshi leaves him alone while he works, and they each respect their specialties. He finds the trap oil and asks to be left alone while he disarms the device. Marcel thinks he's being childish, but Lias reminds her that he has the great responsibility of keeping them alive, thinking it's putting him on edge. When Chuck confirms the location of the device to Senshi, he holds his pan and asks Chuck to trigger the mechanism. He explains that the oil will be boiling, but Senshi insists. When he activates the device, the boiling oil is poured into the cauldron, and some of it catches Lias. Chuck is concerned about Senshi, but the temperature doesn't seem to affect him, and he realizes that it's at the perfect temperature for frying, noting that it's olive oil. Senshi explains that they can use the oil for deep frying, and he suggests using other traps to help prepare the dish. Chuck is unsure about this, because traps don't always work correctly, but Senshi decides to trust him, reminding him that he's the expert when it comes to traps. Senshi asks him to help with other parts of the dish, since he's the cooking expert. Chuck has some difficulties making the dishes, but finally manages to create the perfect version. The party enjoys their food, and Senshi thanks Chuck for the help and for teaching him about unconventional kitchen tools. He praises Chuck for his knowledge, and Chuck offers to teach him about traps in exchange for what he learned about cooking. The party starts to get tired as they continue descending the dungeon stairs. They reach a dead end, so Chuck asks for Lias's sword and proceeds to hit the wall. He finds a secret passage, and the party is relieved by the time they saved. However, when Lias looks at his sword, he realizes that the decoration is missing. In a flashback, when he and his sister began their journey, they were part of a collector's party while getting used to the dungeon. The castle was covered in gold, so it was a good opportunity to make money. As they delve deeper into the dungeon, they encounter a deteriorated armor, realizing that if they die, there will be no one to find them. They arrive at a hall full of armors, and the party leader thinks about making money by selling them, but he suddenly ends up dead, so the party panics as the armors come to life. Lias tries to attack it, but his sword breaks in half, and it continues to chase them. So Lias grabs one of the swords from the hall and manages to defeat the knight with his new sword, but soon he's attacked by another. This was the memory of his first death, and he was terrified of armors for a long time after that happened, saying he studied documents about them, but he has no idea how they taste. He asks Senshi how he would prepare armor, but Senshi tells him that it isn't edible. Marcel explains that they aren't really creatures, since they're just being controlled by magic. Lias tries to convince them that it isn't a bad idea, but doesn't have much success. Lias seems sad about his inability to eat armor, while his party asks him to hurry up. They decide to give it a try, but an armor gets in the way, so they prepare to fight, but Senshi manages to destroy it. More armors start to move, and the party fights them off, but Lias advises the others to run, as he observes the armors reassembling and blocking the path. They decide to retreat to understand what's happening, and Marcel recalls that armors don't have feelings, so she suggests killing the creature that controls them, and Lias wonders why they were behaving differently, thinking they're protecting something. Everyone thinks that it's the monster or mage controlling them, and if they can defeat the magic user, the movement of the armors would stop. Lias suggests that someone should enter the hall, while the other three serve as bait for the armors, but the party decides that he should enter, wishing him luck. Chuck recalls that he isn't good in combat, and there's no point in hiding from something that has no eyes or ears. The party prepares for the plan, and they enter the room again, drawing the attention of the armors. The three fight them off, while Lias tries to go unnoticed to the door. He reaches the chamber, and he finds another armor, but with a much more intimidating appearance. It appears stronger than the others, but he needs to figure out what the armors are trying to protect. He starts by trying to hit its limbs and limit its movements, but the armor sends him flying, and his sword breaks again. The armor keeps approaching as Laius desperately throws a rock at it, but the armor allows itself to get hit while moving the shield away. Laius wonders why it protected the shield, and he notices something attached to it. He wonders what creature is inside it and starts to remember how the armor grabbed its head to attack and turned the helmet to follow his movements. He realizes that it's also a creature and it's moving by instinct. In the other room, the other three are having trouble with the armors, so they ask Laius to hurry up. He thinks of all the ways to kill the creature, but he needs to find out what it is. Laius doesn't have much time, and he can't match the creature in strength, so he decides to attack its egg. He throws a stone to distract its senses. He pulls off its head, and he hides from the armor, but he realizes that the helmet is empty. Laius gets desperate, but it hits another corner, so he realizes that it hasn't noticed which pillar he ran to. He thinks it must have something to do with the helmet, so he searches it again and finds a type of slit, and when he opens it with his sword, he kills the mollusk inside. He understands that the creatures are mollusks, and the armor is like their shell. He easily defeats the creature, separating its parts and killing the mollusks. Laius is impressed by how the mollusks function like tendons and muscles, wondering which one laid the egg. His friends scream for him to hurry up, so he decides to help them. He enters the room and sees his friends in trouble, so he throws the shield to draw the monster's attention, causing them to become confused. Marcel wonders what he did, and Laius shows them the armor he defeated. They're surprised to discover that there was no magic user, but living beings working together to become stronger. He starts to look like a maniac, as he thinks about how no one had noticed this until now, and how they can shock the world, but his friends aren't as excited. He wonders if they can eat the creatures inside the armor, but Marcel scolds him for wanting to eat something so strange and unknown. Laius explains that any new food is mysterious, and Senshi thinks that he can try cooking it. Marcel thinks it's dangerous and could be poisonous, but Laius thinks they should let him cook. They start analyzing the pieces, thinking they look like shellfish, so they decide to mix them and use the helmet to create steam, and the grilled living armor is ready. Laius eats it and is shocked by how delicious it is, but the others aren't sure, waiting for any symptoms of food poisoning to appear, but Senshi takes a bite, realizing that it tastes good, so Marcel gives it a chance and realizes that it tastes like mushrooms. Laius gets even more excited about other cooking methods. After finishing the meal, they clean the dishes, noting how they never thought that living armor was edible or that they were a type of shellfish that comes out of eggs. The others ask him to stop talking nonsense, and after a while, they gather their things to continue advancing. Laius picks up the sword of the larger armor to replace his broken one, but upon closer inspection, he notices small eyes coming out of the sword. He quickly covers it up to hide it from Marcel, who asks him if he doesn't want her to check if the sword is cursed. Laius refuses, saying he's sure it isn't cursed, and they proceed deeper into the dungeon, unaware that they now have a new companion. As they reach the third level, they enter the Golden Castle, but we learn that it has fallen into ruin, and it's now filled with undead creatures. Laius uses his sense of hearing to help the party avoid the monsters, revealing that he can tell which ones are approaching because their footsteps sound different. He mentions that there are golems on the level, and Marcel reveals that they're 99% dirt, thinking they aren't edible, but Senshi explains that he's interested in their bodies, and he leads the party to his base, revealing that he usually hunts monsters on the 2nd and 4th levels. He knows that most of the monsters on the 3rd level can't be eaten because they're undead creatures, but he mentions that golems are different, saying their bodies are rich in nutrients. He explains that he's using golems like gardens, thinking they're perfect because they protect the plants and control their moisture levels, but they still need to be monitored, saying this is the reason why he made a base on the 3rd level. He opens a secret passage, which leads them to the golems, and he charges in, defeating them with his shovel. The others are impressed, realizing that he's used to this, and he tells them that it's time to harvest the vegetables. They wonder if the vegetables are like parasites to the golems, but Senshi explains that their roots make the soil stronger, so they have a symbiotic relationship with the golems. They gather the vegetables, and Marcel is happy that they'll finally be able to enjoy normal food, but Senshi tells them to gather the weeds, saying he will use them with his fertilizer to revive the golems. So she concludes that he planted the cores on the golems, and this explains why he was able to defeat them so easily. She tells him that it's illegal to activate a magical creature without permission, but he doesn't care, and they continue to plant seeds on the golems. Marcel leaves for the bathroom, and Senshi plants the golem's cores, as he explains that they will revive when the seeds begin to take root. Lias realizes that Senshi has always been looking after the golems, and he explains that he's doing it out of passion, saying it's time to enjoy the fruits of their labor. They prepare to cook the food, and Marcel offers to use her fire magic to help Senshi, but he prefers to do it manually, saying he doesn't want his skills to become rusty by doing it the easy way. He adds the basilisk bacon into the mixture, and when the meal is ready, they enjoy the food, as Marcel notes that it tastes delicious. Lias wonders if there's something inside the golems affecting the flavor, saying they're 99% soil, so he wonders what the other 1% is, but she refuses to tell him the answer. After the meal, Senshi leaves for the toilet, as Marcel notes that the bathrooms are always clean, thinking someone must be looking after them. But she notices that her companions are staring at her, and she sees Senshi carrying buckets, wondering what he's doing. So he explains that he's going to clean the bathrooms, thinking the excrement will serve as effective fertilizers, and she realizes that they were used on the vegetables. Lias wonders why he's so determined to live in the dungeon, thinking he could live a better life on the surface. But he explains that everyone in the dungeon needs him because he's cleaning the toilets and looking after the golems, saying there are only 3 of them left. He thinks that if the golems die, the stronger monsters on the lower floors will climb to the 3rd level and ruin the natural order in the dungeon, making it difficult for adventurers to enjoy their journey. He explains that eating the monsters makes him happy because he feels like he has truly entered the dungeon. Lias wonders if it's okay for him to join them because the dungeon could fall into chaos, but he knows that the golems can survive on their own, and he doesn't want the party to die from hunger. They leave with the vegetables, as Senshi reveals that he has customers on the lower floors, but he thinks they're busy, so they won't be able to entertain him. He explains that he harvested the vegetables because he didn't want to leave the garden lying idle, and Chuck suggests selling them on the 3rd level. They enter a strange shop, which is full of adventurers who can't return to the surface, and the shopkeeper approaches them, asking them if they want to trade. Lias tries to sell the vegetables, but the shopkeeper urges them to leave, saying he only accepts coins. He orders the guard to take them away, but the orcs suddenly arrive, slaughtering everyone in the room. Lias wonders what they're doing there, knowing orcs are supposed to be on the lower floors, and the orc leader Zahn approaches the party, but instead of attacking them, he takes the vegetables, wondering what Senshi is doing there, and he reveals that the orcs are his customers. Zahn mentions that the red dragon appeared, and it's threatening their village, so they decided to retreat to the 3rd level. Lias wonders where it is, but Zahn refuses to tell him because he doesn't want to expose the location of his village. The orcs loot the shop, as Zahn tells Senshi that they need food to survive, ordering him to give them the vegetables for free. He agrees to this, under the condition that they allow his party to stay at their camp, causing everyone to become confused. The party joins the orcs, as they question Senshi's decision, thinking he's going to get them killed. But he explains that the orcs have the ingredients needed to make bread, and they become upset, because he's putting their lives on the line. They reach the camp, and Senshi urges Zahn to give him the ingredients he needs. He teaches the party how to make bread, as Zahn tells his child that the elves and humans have killed countless orcs, so they were forced to leave the surface and seek refuge in the dungeon. He adds that the humans and elves are still hunting them down, but Marcel tells him that the orcs have been raiding other villages, so they had to be driven out. Chuck tells her to stop arguing, but Zahn tells him to shut up, and he takes the dough, helping them make bread, as he continues to argue with her. Senshi notes that the dough is ready, so he slices it into pieces, as Zahn reveals that the castle was made by a wizard, and according to legend, the person who defeats him will become the ruler. Zahn thinks that Lias wants to defeat the wizard, thinking he's just like the other adventurers who keep grinding in the dungeon, so he isn't worthy to become the ruler. Marcel challenges Zahn to rule the castle, telling him to prove that the orcs aren't mindless creatures, and they have another altercation, as Senshi continues to cook the bread. After a few moments, the bread is ready, and Zahn tells Senshi that it belongs to the orcs, but his son implores him to let the party eat. Marcel explains that bread must be enjoyed with other food, telling the child that Zahn just wanted them to wait until the other dishes were ready. Senshi claims that it's part of their deal, telling him that his father won't break his promise, so he reluctantly orders his servants to prepare food. They enjoy their meal together, and Marcel praises the orcs, saying she was wrong about them because they're capable of making delicious food. Laius tells Zahn that his sister was eaten by the red dragon, so he needs to defeat it, asking him to reveal its location, as he promises to keep the orc village safe. Zahn agrees to his request, telling him where to find it, and wishing him luck. The party continues their journey to hunt the dragon, leaving their vegetables to the orcs, and we see that they're on good terms. In a tavern, we see a party of adventurers having a meal, and they enjoy each bite, knowing they won't be able to eat well in the dungeon. A man joins them and calls to the leader named Kabru, revealing that bigger teams are rare, since they usually split up or fight over money. He thinks Kabru might defeat the lunatic magician, but he says that's impossible, and they continue their journey, as his companion Rin scolds him for not saying they will defeat the lunatic magician. She mentions that they aren't ordinary adventurers, but he thinks they should speak with actions, saying they will go deeper into the dungeon. They prepare for the journey, as Kabru orders food for a week, but a party member named Mick notices that their food is heavy, wondering how adventurers can stay in the dungeon for a month. Kabru tries to scare him, telling him that they eat the bodies of other adventurers, and Rin mentions that it's easier to hunt monsters, but Kabru doesn't want to eat them. We see them exploring the dungeon, and Rin notices that the floor doesn't seem difficult, so she suggests going further. But Kabru thinks they should proceed with caution, as he recalls that strange things are happening in the dungeon, causing the monsters to become more active. There's something that catches Mick's attention, so he searches a monster, and he reveals that he found a chest, but Rin thinks it's a waste of time, because there's never gold in it. Kabru just wants to take a look, and they're surprised to see that it's actually full of treasure. He knows that the floor has already been explored, so he wonders why the other adventurers didn't take it, thinking there's something strange going on. But he decides to take it anyway, telling everyone that it's time to return to the city. But after some time, Chuck sees them lying on the ground, thinking they fought over the treasure. Marcel prays so they don't turn into ghosts, while Chuck wonders what to do with the loot. They decide to take it, but Laius's sword seems agitated, so everyone wonders what's happening. Laius feels the sword asking to be drawn, so he pulls it out as the coins start moving. They realize that the coins are monsters, and Laius warns Marcel to stay away from the bodies. She notices that a necklace is starting to move, realizing it's an insect, so she freaks out, and they see a flash of light as she uses her magic, stunning the monsters in the area. They're happy to be alive, as Marcel mentions that bugs are disgusting. Laius didn't notice that the coins were treasure bugs, but everyone wonders why he took out his sword. So Laius explains that he saw something move, as he notes that his monster responded to the threat, and Senshi examines the bugs, as he mentions that most of them are edible. He explains that they're tasty, and they're an excellent source of protein. Laius wonders how he can tell which gems are monsters, so Senshi explains how to tell them apart. He decides to prepare the meal, so he takes the centipede's legs and puts them on skewers. He fries the coins and demonstrates how to present them on the plate. The eggs are removed from the tiara, and he boils everything together until the food is ready to eat. Chuck admits that it looks nice, but it doesn't look appetizing, and he reveals that he has tasted it before since it's a local cuisine. He tastes it, and he's surprised by how good it is, as Senshi explains that dungeon monsters taste better. Marcel eats it, finding the texture strange, and Senshi guarantees that the monsters will get tastier as they go down the dungeon. Laius bites a sandwich, and he finds it delicious, noticing how the monsters look like real jewelry. He thinks about how they camouflage themselves, as he wonders why his sword identified them. He takes a coin, using it to test his sword, and he realizes that his sword is shaking. His companions notice this, so he eats the coin to hide it, saying it was nothing. But he wonders if the monster in his sword wants to protect him, thinking it's cute, and he decides to give it a name. Chuck wonders what they should do with the ones they can't eat, but Senshi doesn't care. So Chuck throws them away, but Senshi mentions that they're real gems. Chuck and Marcel think about what they heard, wondering why he didn't say that before, and they become depressed, while Laius mentions that the name of his sword is Kensuk. They arrive at a door, so Chuck asks for a moment to open it. Laius thinks they need to rest, but Marcel's stomach starts growling. Chuck opens the door, and they enter a dining room, where we see the paintings moving. Lias thinks about it, and when he gets too close, the painting starts to drag him. They realize it's a living painting, so Marcel attacks it with her magic. But Lias explains that he wanted it to swallow him so that he can eat the grapes in the painting, and everyone thinks he's an idiot. Lias knows he can't eat a painting, but he thinks he should be able to steal the grapes inside. Lias chooses a painting with food, and he dives into it. A maid sees him, but she thinks he's a guard, so she asks for help with the fruits. He enters a room with a king, who seems happy about the birth of his son. The maid fights with him for standing still, and tells him to bring another basket, as the king names his son Delgol. Lias becomes nervous, thinking he won't be able to eat there, so he runs away, giving the signal, and they pull him back. They wonder what happened in the painting, and Lias explains that the room killed his appetite, but he's determined to return at a better time. Chuck finds a painting of a party, and Lias wastes no time, falling on a table. He's beaten for being a drunk idiot, but the man decides to forgive him, saying he was just celebrating. We learn that the man is Delgol, and Lias realizes that he's the baby from the other painting. The king approaches to toast the moment with his son, and Lias is ready to eat his chicken, but a cup falls, as the king is poisoned. Lias curses his luck, and starts gathering food, as an elf bumps into him, and Lias realizes that he was in the previous painting. He gets pulled back, and he tells them that he brought food, but he realizes that there's nothing on him. He gets ready for the next painting, and he sees a full meal waiting for him. He realizes that he's in a crowning ceremony, and it looks like the prince inherited the throne. He finally gets to eat, and after the meal, he decides to go back, but is surprised by the elf from before. He grabs onto Lias, saying he doesn't belong there, and remembers him at the prince's birth and wedding, thinking he's after the throne, so the elf prepares to burn him, but Lias is pulled back as the painting catches fire. They wonder what happened to him, so he explains everything, but he suddenly realizes that he's hungry again. He can't believe it, realizing that the food in his stomach disappeared, and they tell him that his plan is ridiculous. They decide to camp, but Chuck notices a chest moving, thinking it's a mimic, but he decides to not say anything because he doesn't want anyone to open it. We see the others sleeping, but Chuck is hungry, and he realizes that they have no water, so he decides to fill their container. He wakes Marcel up, saying he's going to get water, and he fills the water bag, finding a treasure bug along the way. He thinks about eating it, but notices he's going to where the mimic is, so he's afraid the bug will activate it, and he runs after it. But he suddenly activates a trap. He doesn't want to call the others, since other monsters might appear, and imagines that Marcel will notice that he hasn't returned. But he realizes that he shouldn't trust that, thinking she went back to sleep. He decides to deactivate the mechanism from the inside, knowing he just needs to avoid the mimic. The clue is in an ancient language, but Chuck thinks he saw that writing before, knowing he needs to press the buttons in the right sequence to avoid the spears. He becomes frustrated, since he has no idea how to figure out the correct order, when he suddenly realizes that he's sitting on the mimic. Chuck manages to escape, but accidentally activates one of the traps. But he manages to get rid of the mimic, but finds the first chest, realizing it has always been empty. He gets angry and kicks it, seeing a treasure bug inside. He notices that the inscriptions are the same as the sign, so he knows what the sequence is. But the mimic starts moving again, so he starts pressing the buttons as the creature approaches him. He finally manages to open the door, and he runs away as the mimic activates the trap, causing it to get crushed. Marcel wakes the others, realizing that Chuck hasn't returned yet, and they see him on the floor. Lias thinks the mimic is amazing, and Senshi reveals that he never cooked one. Marcel wonders if it's safe to eat, but Senshi tells her to let him cook. After a while, he opens the pot, and it's just like lobster. Lias seems to have problems reaching the meat, so Senshi suggests using the handle, but it doesn't work. Senshi asks Chuck for his tools, but he doesn't want to give it to them. So Senshi grabs him, while Lias uses his tools, thinking it's perfect. Kaburu's party wakes up, as two adventurers revive them, and they wonder where all their treasure went. The men think they were defeated by treasure bugs, but one of them explains that he doesn't know what happened, saying their belongings must have been stolen by another party. They prepare to leave, but the men want to be paid for reviving them, so they give him a bag of coins. His companion wonders why he hid the truth, so he explains that it's better with more bodies in the dungeon. We return to Lias's party, as Marcel mentions that she wants to wash her hair. She explains that clean hair is important for magic, telling Senshi that if his beard is dirty, her spells may not work on him, but he thinks that's actually a good thing. They decide to move, as Lias wonders how they can cross the water, but Marcel uses her magic, and she tells them they can just walk across. But Senshi sinks when he tries to cross, so they save him, and Marcel realizes it's because of his beard. Lias notices that it's covered with the monster's blood, and Marcel finds it disgusting. But Senshi assures him that he shouldn't worry, because he will cross the lake without magic. He puts the mimic shell in the water, and something suddenly starts to appear. A creature comes out of the water, and it's a kelpie named Anna. She approaches Senshi, and he says that she always appears when he comes fishing, so he wonders if he could ride her. Marcel is delighted, thinking it's a real adventure, but Lias is against it, and suggests making floats with her organs. They wonder what kind of sociopath he is, but Lias explains that monsters are unpredictable and dangerous, and she can make them sink if they let their guard down. But Senshi mounts her, and Lias wonders why people always prefer cute monsters. Anna is ready to go, but Lias doesn't trust her, and he throws a rope before Senshi sinks. He jumps into the water, and we see Anna ready to attack Senshi, but he defends with the mimic shell, asking her to stop. The shell breaks, but Lias stabs her, and Anna fights back, so Senshi realizes that he has no choice but to join the fight. Marcel and Chuck are pulling the rope, and they see blood appearing in the water, but Lias comes out. Senshi can't believe that Anna attacked him, realizing that she was just waiting for him to mount her. He takes his axe, and Marcel can't believe he's ready to cook her. Lias wonders if he needs help, but Senshi prefers to do it alone. He dismantles the body, and Marcel suddenly asks to have a piece of fat. They prepare the food, when Lias spots something in the water, and goes to check with Chuck. They see Cobra's party, and Lias remembers them, wondering how they got there. They pull Cobra's party out of the water, and decide to gather the grains. Moments later, Marcel approaches Senshi, saying she used Anna's fat to make soap, because it's going to be useful for his beard. He thanks her, and decides to use it immediately since she tried so hard, making her blush. So he uses the soap, and she helps him with his beard. She enchants him again, and he's able to walk on the water. He enjoys the feeling, thanking Marcel for allowing him to have this experience. They're attacked by flying fish, and Marcel decides to eliminate them with her magic, so she uses her spell, and an explosion kills all of them. Senshi becomes angry at her, saying they're the base of the food chain, so she could destroy the dungeon's ecosystem by hunting all of them. He tells her she needs to kill them one at a time, but she explains that she was just trying to defend herself, and there are more fish than usual, so he shouldn't be so upset. Senshi thinks she's wrong, but she doesn't want to die protecting monsters. We see a group of fishmen watching them underwater, but a tentacled creature suddenly attacks them. The fishmen start to go wild, and Senshi ends up falling into the water. He warns everyone that something is approaching, and a giant creature suddenly appears. Senshi wonders what it is, and Lias tells him it's a kraken. They get together, and Lias decides they will distract the creature, asking Marcel for help. The creature chases after them, and she takes the chance to attack, throwing a fireball. She manages to hit the kraken, but it remains unscathed. It attacks the trio, and Senshi realizes that their weapons can only cut the surface of its skin. Chuck is attacked by a ball, and it's actually the head of a fishman. Senshi takes a trident, and he goes to Marcel, saying he has a plan. They hide behind a pillar, and she wonders if he's ever done this before. He denies this, so she becomes angry, but he explains that he has killed squids before. The kraken heads straight for Marcel, and she uses her water walk spell as it flies over Senshi. He runs after it, and climbs the kraken, stabbing its eyes, and killing it in an instant. Senshi explains how to kill an octopus, but Lias just wonders how it tastes. Marcel is surprised that he never tried them, and starts listing how they can be prepared. She says she can take him to a restaurant to try it, but Lias decides to make it with kraken meat. They take out a piece, and Lias looks excited, but realizes that it tastes horrible. He wonders how Marcel can eat that, but something starts to move, and it attacks Senshi, but he manages to kill it. Lias is amazed at the size of the parasite, while Marcel asks him to get rid of it, but Senshi explains that parasites are used in food, so Lias thinks it's time to cook. Senshi prepares the parasite, grilling it with barbecue sauce. The worms are ready, and Lias takes the first bite as he realizes that it tastes great. Everyone eats the kraken as Lias reveals that he ate a raw piece in secret and it still tasted great, but Marcel is shocked to hear this. The fish start to feed on the kraken as Senshi explains that the medium monsters are about to return to normal. Lias suddenly feels something in his stomach, falling in pain. Senshi explains that he must have been attacked by the parasite inside the raw food, and they're found in normal fish as well. He tells Lias that they won't lay eggs, but they could leave a hole in his stomach. Senshi finds it all interesting because the fishmen eat the smaller fish and the kraken eats them, but now it will serve as food for the smaller fish. He thinks about the food chain in the dungeon and thinks he was wrong before because they are also part of the ecosystem. Lias tries to speak, but the pain is too much for him and he sleeps with the pain of a knife cutting his stomach. We see Marcel waking up worried, and she goes to check Lias, but realizes she can't hear his heartbeat, and Chuck explains that it's because of the armor. They decide to let him sleep a little longer, since he suffered all night in pain. Marcel thinks about the dungeons, and how defeating the monsters serves to stabilize the ecosystem. If they don't do anything, the monsters will increase and invade the village until the city places a reward for defeating the monsters, so she thinks that everything is really well thought out. Chuck wonders what she's saying, and she explains that dungeons are complex, and remembers when she studied them. We see a flashback to her school, where students talk about Marcel and how she's famous for being the school's first genius. They start gossiping about her, but she smiles, and she explains that she asked the teacher to let her join the class. The teacher tells them that the class is about spiritual cultivation, so they take a jar and go outside. They must make several layers with the earth and create a barrier to fill the jar with mana, and then add spirits inside. The spirits feed on mana, so they die if it's too thin or too dense. It looks like the structure of a dungeon and is the basics for learning how to cast spells. The students need to store it to check the result later, and they're all surprised by Marcel's jar. They're confused since summoning magic is different from her field of study, so Marcel explains that she wants to create a safe dungeon. She explains how they're the source of ingredients for magic, but many of them are dangerous to obtain, so she thinks that if they create a safe dungeon, it could help humanity. We also see Fallon, and a girl bumps into her. Marcel helps Fallon as she notices how Fallon's jar has impurities, thinking the spirits won't survive like that. So one of the girls informs her that Fallon always skips classes and is full of dirt, so everyone thinks she's strange. After a while, they're about to check if the spirits in the jars survived, and they use a candle to find out. Marcel's candle gets bigger, so the teacher tells her that she did a good job. On the other hand, Fallon is checking her spirits too when an explosion happens. The teacher seems impressed, and Marcel wonders how she did it. Fallon reveals that she found a place teeming with spirits, so she used the earth there, and Marcel wants to see it, so Fallon whispers that it's inside a real dungeon. She takes Marcel to a crack, and they enter it, crawling through the opening. Upon reaching the other side, Fallon plays with the grass, and Marcel wonders if she always does this, realizing this is why people think she's weird. They cross a river and continue walking, as Fallon eats the fruit along the way, but Marcel thinks she shouldn't eat that. They arrive at the dungeon, and it's the first time Marcel has seen one, thinking the cave appeared naturally. Fallon runs inside, but Marcel hesitates, so Fallon holds out her hand, and Marcel decides to join her. They arrive at a glade, and Marcel notices how there are many spirits inside. She looks at the ground, and realizes that this is where Fallon comes to skip class. It seems that the place isn't dangerous, and Marcel thinks that they can use the place to plant mandrakes and take advantage of the mana around it. She realizes that the place has a source of water when a slime starts to appear. Marcel decides to attack, but Fallon stops her, explaining that it doesn't reach where the sun shines. Fallon tells her that they convert bat droppings into magic, so the dungeon will disappear if they die. The two spend their time together in the place, and Marcel starts to wonder about bats and where raspberries grow, realizing she can't make a dungeon without knowing these things first. She thanks Fallon for bringing her, and they become good friends. Chuck thinks the part about being the first genius seems fake, but Marcel argues that she was really smart. She says that the dungeon works just like those jars, But this dungeon circulates a ridiculous amount of mana, so if the lunatic magician exists, he's not a normal magic user. She thinks Senshi should get out of there, since the dungeons are full of magic, and he seems to hate it, but he says it's none of her business. Lias realizes that Marcel was the one Fallon was talking about, revealing that he received letters from Fallon while she was at the magic school, and she was full of worry, but she found a new friend, and then everything got better. Lias explains how she always praised her friend for being incredible, and Marcel admits that she talks about him too. Marcel gets excited because they must save Fallon soon, annoying Lias to move. Chuck analyzes the map, and they should reach the Red Dragon in 2 days. Marcel tells him she wants a shower, so Chuck asks her to be quick. She prepares the water, and she starts to clean herself, wondering if she should have learned illusion magic, and thinks it was easier when there were more women in the group. She remembers when they split up, getting angry about it, because she considered them as her friends. They wake Lias to continue, and Marcel realizes that she boiled too much water, so she pours it into the lake. But a water ball appears, and floats out of the water, and Marcel realizes she needs to escape. The ball attacks her, while the others realize what's happening. Marcel doesn't have her staff, and she falls into the lake. Senshi prepares to fight, but Chuck mentions that they need fire, so Senshi decides to start one, as Chuck asks her to hold on. The creature attacks again, but she manages to escape and cast a spell on it. Lias appears, while Marcel wonders where the creature went. She runs towards them, but gets hit in the leg. She attacks again, but doesn't know where it will appear, and she gets shot, while the others become desperate. She's running out of mana, so she needs to use it all in the next attack. She tries to find out where it is, and realizes that the blood changed its color. So she prepares her spell, exploding into the air, and she starts to fall, but Lias manages to catch her. They almost fall into the water, but their companions pull them in as the creature gets bigger. Lias realizes the time has come, so they start running for their lives. They manage to escape, but Marcel is running out of blood and mana, so she can't heal herself. Lias thinks that he should have learned healing magic from Fallon, and Chuck calls him to talk. He explains that they can't continue without Marcel's magic, and they don't have the water walking spell to get back. Lias suggests waiting for a healer to pass by, but Chuck remembers that they have nothing to trade. Senshi remembers that kelpie meat is nutritious, so Lias seems to have an idea, and he suggests a barbecue. They set up the grill, separating the liver for Marcel, as it's the most nutritious part. So Lias wakes her up and asks her to sit down, since she needs to eat. They prepare the food to feed Marcel, and Senshi tells her that they must make sure the organs are cooked first, so they eat it in front of her. They continue eating the meat, while Marcel only eats liver, and they keep asking if it's good, so she yells to let her eat the other parts too. Lias thinks she's feeling better because of the liver, but Chuck wonders what they're going to do with her lack of mana. We see adventurers above them, and they smell the barbecue, but we see their old party member Namari among them, and she wonders who could be cooking. Chuck hears footsteps as the adventurers approach. Namari recognizes Lias and greets the party, introducing them to her new group, Tansu and his wife, and the twins Kaka and Kiki. Marcel wakes up and wonders how she can act friendly after abandoning Fallon, but Namari explains that she just didn't want to die. She realizes that Marcel isn't well, so Namari asks her to take it easy, saying Fallon wouldn't be happy if something happened to her. Lias asks if they can heal her, but Tansu wonders what they would get in return. Lias offers some kelpie meat, but he refuses and asks Namari not to do charity work in the dungeon. Lias warns them about the water spirit, and Tansu realizes that Marcel angered a spirit. But he tells them not to underestimate him, because gnomes have lived alongside spirits since ancient times, so he just needs to talk to it. Tansu starts talking to the water spirit, but it doesn't work, and he uses Namari as a shield, while the twins help him escape. Lias wonders what happened, but Tansu says she'll be fine, as he heals her, but Namari is tired of being used as a shield. The group argues, and Senshi declares that he doesn't like resurrection magic, since it isn't pleasant to look at. Lias thinks this is normal in the dungeon, but Senshi doesn't think it's normal at all. Tansu explains to Senshi that the dungeon is under a powerful spell, and it traps the soul in the bodies, so as long as the wounds are healed, they can come back to life. He introduces himself again, and we learn he's a researcher of ancient spells studying magic circles. He proposes that if they assist with his research, he will heal Marcel in exchange. Laius accepts this, so he goes with them. Tansa notices elven runes on the walls, and they cut the roots so he can see it better. Namari notices that Laius has a strange sword, and thinks he should get one from a dwarven shop. She starts explaining how to take care of the equipment, and thinks that Senchi's axe is even worse. She apologizes for the lecture, but Laius trusts her about equipment more than anyone. Laius feels something, and warns them that there's a monster ahead. Tansa wonders how he knows, since he can't trust a hunch, but Namari tells him to trust his feelings. So Kiki tries to make the monster appear, but she's caught by tentacles. Laius is impressed, and Namari tells him to stop admiring the monster. She can't reach it, so she suggests letting themselves be captured, but Laius explains that the monster has a paralyzing effect, and they might not be able to fight if they do that. Tansa wants him to go anyway, so Laius decides to try, and asks for Senchi's helmet. Namari is worried about him, but Laius says everything will be fine, because he trusts her and Senchi, but they don't understand what he means. He draws the monster's attention, and he's grabbed by the tentacle. Namari shouts for him to attack the center of the creature, but Laius cuts one of the tentacles. Senchi understands what he's doing, and catches the crossbow in the air, throwing it to Namari, who realizes what Laius said before and shoots the monster, so it lets them go. They return to the others, and Tansa heals Kiki. Chuck wonders what happened to Laius's face, so he explains that he was stung by a monster. Senchi wonders what he should do, and they discover that he was also stunned when he took the tentacles off the crossbow, and now he can't let go. Laius looks at his book, and it says to wash it with vinegar. Namari pours the vinegar, and they also make a cross-cut and peel the skin, making it look like a banana. Laius notes that it's edible, and Senchi decides to try it, but thinks it could be better if he cooked it. Laius tastes it as well, and he thinks it has a different taste in each part. Chuck thinks he sounds crazy, so he tastes it too, but he only tastes the vinegar. They give some to Marcel, and even offer it to Namari, but she doesn't seem excited. Kiki feels better, so Tansa decides to heal Laius, but he asks him to help Marcel first. He heals her, and Marcel thanks Namari for her help, promising to forget about her betrayal. The water spirit is still watching the floor, and Tansu wonders what they did to make it angry. Tansu explains that it's a collection of lesser spirits, so they just need to wait for the angry spirits to die and a new generation to take their place, but that would take a week. Marcel realizes that they don't have that much time, while Tansu decides to go to the surface and come back later, so Chuck suggests something to Laius. Marcel can't believe they want her to go with Tansu, but Laius explains that she's out of magic. Marcel thinks she's fine, but Laius notices that her staff has no aura, so she tries to put magic on it, but this just makes Namari laugh at her. Namari doesn't think they will be able to defeat the dragon, and notes that Senchi's axe won't be able to last. Marcel realizes that Namari has defeated many dragons, so she begs her to return to their party and promises to pay well. But Chuck tells her to give up, because if Namari returns because of money, she'll be seen as a sellout among the adventurers, and and this won't be good for business. Marcel thinks she has no other option, so she says that there's a way to get her mana back, saying she needs to eat the water spirit. Senshi and Lias don't like the idea, and Marcel wonders why, since they love eating monsters. She explains that water spirits are full of magical energy, and maybe they can attack it using heat, but Lias doesn't like her ideas. Marcel starts to think, and she looks at Senshi's pot. She realizes they could heat it and use it as a shield, so they can attack and defend at the same time. Chuck doesn't think a shabby pan would protect her, but Senshi is offended, so he explains that it's been in his family for generations, and it's an excellent pan. Namari suddenly notices something, and she grabs the pot, realizing that it's made of adamantine. She trembles, explaining that it can resist a dragon's claws, and every blacksmith dreams of using this metal. She asks why he uses it as a pot, so he reveals that it was a shield, but he finds it more useful this way. Marcel thinks they can use it against the spirit, and Lias shows that they also have a lid, so they can attack from both sides, but Namari wonders if Lias is strong enough. They face the spirit and prepare for its attack, but Lias can't take it and falls. The spirit is ready to attack again, but Namari pushes Lias and picks up the pan. Namari and Senshi rush to attack, and they manage to trap the spirit. It tries to escape, but they put the pot on the fire and kill it, but it burns their hand. Marcel thanks Namari for her help, as she begins to drink the water, but finds spiritual magic difficult to absorb, so Senshi suggests that they cook something to help her with the absorption. Marcel cuts the vegetables, while she seasons the kelpie meat, and throws everything into the water. She tastes it and gets proud of the flavor, so the food is ready. Marcel hands it out, and she gives Namari some, but she seems worried. Marcel eats the stew, and she feels her mana returning. Namari wonders how long they've been eating monsters, and thinks this must be punishment for abandoning them, but she can't believe how good it is, and wonders if it was because of the pot. She apologizes to Senshi for making fun of his axe, but he says it's okay. Tansu decides to leave, but Namari insists he try the stew. She explains that she wants their trust, and will work hard to get their approval, so they accept the food. After eating, Namari tells them that she thought Chuck would be the first to leave since he likes getting paid, but he explains he was paid in advance, so he can't back out, and Marcel is surprised he's not doing it for Fallon. Lias wonders what Shuro is doing, and Namari doesn't know either, but she remembers that he was in love with Fallon, so she thinks he must be looking for her too, while Lias didn't even know he liked his sister. Namari tells them not to die, and Marcel wishes the best for her, as they all say goodbye. The party advances, and Chuck wonders if they are going the right way. Lias checks the map from the orcs, and Chuck thinks the stairs to the 5th floor look sketchy. Lias suggests that the tentacles are there to ward off outsiders, so he decides to trust the map. A tentacle suddenly scares Marcel, and Chuck explains that they like to hide in hollow walls. They often interfere with the traps, causing all kinds of problems, so he hates them as much as mimics. Lias thinks they've made good progress, but they've barely made it out of the entrance, so he wonders how the orcs got to the 3rd floor. Chuck notices a monster, while Lias's sword is caught by a giant frog, and it drops it down the hole. Marcel blows up the monster, but her staff is stolen by another frog, and it drops it down as well. The frogs jump at them, but Senshi fights them off, so they try to take away his axe, but the group holds it back. Chuck notices a tentacle tangled up in a trap, preventing it from working, and he wants to activate it. He can't touch tentacles directly, so he asks Lias why the frogs aren't affected by them, but Lias has no idea. He decides to do it anyway, and make gloves out of the frog's skin. He pulls on the tentacle, but it doesn't come out, so the frog eats him. The party freaks out, but this pulls the tentacle and activates the trap, killing the monster. They take Chuck out of the frog, and Lias is surprised that he survived. He realizes what Chuck did, and thinks it's a great idea, so they decide to use the frog's skin, while Marcel wonders what they're going to use it for. She sees Senshi preparing frog meat, while Lias and Chuck take measurements, and soon everything is ready. Marcel refuses to put on the skin suit, but Lias mentions she would look cute in it, so they end up all putting it on. They continue on, and manage to pass through the tentacles without getting hurt, so they retrieve their weapons and notice they've made it to the 5th floor. They notice that people fled in panic, so Laius warns them that the dragon is close. They try to take off their clothes, but the blood is clotted and stuck to their bodies. Marcel wonders if they're going to face the dragon like this, and questions how she can meet Fallon like this. Meanwhile, Namari's party leaves through a portal, but it makes her sick, and Tansa tells them that he'll report to the island's lord. He takes a carriage to the lord's house, and the lord asks how the research is going. Tansu explains that the third floor has been looted, and there are more places for bandits, while orcs also appeared. The lord wonders how they got in, and Tansa talks about an old dwarven mine that's connected to the dungeon, thinking they could have come from there. We learn the lord hates dwarves, thinking they're like moles that always create tunnels. In the past, the elves and dwarves were divided between the east and west, and the dwarves always dug tunnels to prepare for the elves. They continued digging even after the war, swallowing the golden country and turning it into a dungeon. Tansa shows that he copied more magic circles, and they all seem to be made by the same person, so he suspects the lunatic magician. He's not sure that the lunatic magician is an elf, but his magic goes beyond that of a normal human. The Lord says that things are getting complicated, and reveals a letter from the elves was sent, demanding the dungeon back. Tansa tells him to ignore it, but he explains that his land was bestowed by the king of the elves, so he can't just ignore it. He thinks there must be treasure in the dungeon, but Tansa states that they want the dungeon's immortality spell. He explains that the spell that binds the soul to the body is a great mystery, so whoever manages to solve it first will get something more precious than gold. He thinks they need to get the blueprint for the spell at any cost, and if they learn it, the elves will beg to trade with him. The Lord wonders how to get it, and Tansa thinks that it must be with the lunatic magician, so he should continue supporting the adventurers to conquer the dungeon, giving all his wealth if necessary. So the Lord decides to put a bounty on the orcs, while Tansu offers to buy time with the elves, while he wonders how far Laius can go. We see Namari wake up, and Kiki greets her. She gives her payment, and accompanies her to the street. They wonder if she's going home or to an inn, but Namari wants to head toward the dungeon, explaining that she has business at the nearby temple. So they go with her, and Namari looks for Fallon, but the guy explains that nobody there fits her description, so she must still be in the dungeon. Meanwhile, the party enters the 5th floor, and they explore the ruins of the castle town. They arrive where the orcs camped, and it appears they left in a hurry. They find flour, so Senshi decides to make bread, while Laius opens a door and sees charred monsters that still have smoke coming from them. Marcel realizes that Laius said dragons aren't active, but this one is still walking around, so she doesn't know if they can beat a dragon that isn't sleepy. She starts to doubt whether they'll make it, so Laius tries to calm her down. Chuckle to fight a dragon, and they wonder why he's not counting himself, but he yells that he's not made for fighting. Senshi asks how they defeated dragons before, so Laius explains that Fallon would cast protection spells, then the 3 fighters would slow the dragon's movements, while Marcel supports it with magic, and Shiro would deal the finishing blow. He realizes that this won't work for them, so he thinks of another plan. The easiest way to attack is to aim for its neck, so Senshi wonders how high up it is, and Laius points to where the dragon hit its head. They go take a closer look, and Laius wonders if they can't try jumping on the dragon, but the others don't think it will work. Marcel explains that her defense spells aren't as strong as Fallon's, and Chuck points out that their equipment isn't good either. Laius suggests using the buildings, and he explains that there are a lot of bridges in the city, so they can blow one up and trap the dragon so they can attack its neck. He explains that they can make the dragon chase them while Marcel charges her spell, and this will make the dragon even more tired. Chuck thinks he can help with this, and Laius wonders why the dragon appeared on the 5th floor. Chuck remembers they also have Senshi's pot that can block the dragon's breath, and their hopes begin to rise. They begin to map out the fight's route, while Senshi bakes bread. They also find wine and cheese, so Senshi decides to make a dish before the fight. He turns the bread into panko, which he uses to bread the frog meat. He then reduces the wine to make the sauce, and soon the food to conquer the red dragon is ready. They eat their meal, and Marcel gets emotional thinking that soon she won't need to eat monsters anymore. Laius thanks everyone for helping him, but suddenly they feel the dragon approaching as it walks around the city. They go over their plan, and Marcel casts fire and impact resistance spells on everyone. The dragon wanders around the city, and Laius makes noise to attract its attention, so they begin to run away. Laius warns that a red dragon can run at 60 kilometers an hour, while Chuck thinks he should have mentioned that sooner. They go down the stairs, and Laius wants to make it breathe fire so they can use up all its fuel. It works, and the dragon breathes fire at them, but they use the pan as a shield. They can handle it thanks to the pot and the fire resistance spell, but the heat spreads and it burns their hand. So they realize they won't be able to make it run out of fuel. They continue to run, and Chuck thinks it was obvious that it would get hot since Senshi uses it to cook. The dragon prepares to attack again, so they decide to change route. Marcel watches them from afar, but she thinks they're getting closer too early. Marcel asks about the plan and wonders what to do. She decides to follow it and activates her magic, so the building explodes and falls on top of the dragon. It seems to work, but the dragon gets up, and it throws Marcel into the air as the debris hits the others. Laius tells Chuck not to move, and the dragon is right on top of them. He sees its weak spot, waiting for it to take a few more steps so he can reach it, but Kensuke suddenly moves and throws himself away. Laius curses him for running away, while Chuck can't believe what he just did. They go under the dragon's belly to avoid its attacks, and Chuck becomes furious with him. They seem to be stuck, but Marcel draws its attention. Senshi also attacks, but his axe breaks. They complain that their only weapon is destroyed, and Senshi has no choice, so he reveals his knife is made from mithril and can cut through any monster. Laius uses it, and he notices that it pierces the dragon's armor, but it's too short and only makes the dragon angrier. Marcel realizes that the plan has failed and wonders what she should do as she runs towards them. Laius needs his sword, and Senshi decides to get its attention. Laius thinks it's too risky, but Senshi explains that it's a matter of eat or be eaten, and if they don't make desperate attempts then they'll be eaten. So he runs towards the sword, but is crushed by the dragon. Laius also runs, but falls thanks to Chuck, as he orders him to think of a plan with Marcel. He runs to Senshi and sees his knife. Senshi can still move, while Chuck takes out the knife and dodges the dragon, throwing it at its eye. Chuck reaches for the sword, but it's stuck in the ground, so Senshi helps him and throws it to Laius. Laius explains that he'll return soon, as the debris falls on both of them. Laius runs, and he bumps into Marcel. He explains that Senshi and Chuck are unconscious with the dragon, and Marcel wonders what to do. He has an idea, and wants to get on the level of the dragon's head, wanting to get into the pot so she can explode him. Marcel isn't sure, but Laius explains that the dragon is blind in one eye, so they should be able to approach it from its blind spot. They carry out the plan, and Marcel activates her magic. Laius goes flying and grabs the dragon's face. It tries to get him off, but he remembers he's doing it for Fallon. He gives up his leg, hanging from the dragon's mouth, but he's able to stab the weak spot. Laius begins to fall, but the dragon is also defeated. We see him lying on the floor as he remembers his childhood. He goes to a cemetery with Fallon, but he seems disappointed and holds her hand to go back, but realizes that it's not Fallon as a ghost attacks him. The villagers approach, and Laius is shaking on the ground, but Fallon shouts to leave her brother alone, making the ghost let go of him. She explains that a ring is binding the ghost's soul to the earth, so they must remove it, and the others wonder how she could know this. Laius recovers from the attack, and Fallon wonders if she did something wrong. He assures her that adults are just scared of magic, and thinks that her talent for ghosts is cool, so she should study hard. He tells her she could travel the world helping people, and Fallon asks him to go with her. But he dreams about her, and she says that maybe it would be better if they didn't travel together anymore, telling him not to worry about her. Laius wakes up, and Marcel explains that she stopped the bleeding. She asks him to wait while she helps the others, and Laius wonders what he just saw. She finds them in the wreckage, and apologizes for her magic not being that strong. She heals Chuck, but he wakes up screaming, and Senshi wonders why he's suffering more than before. Marcel explains that he's having healing pains, and it happens when a person heals too quickly. Marcel finds Laius's leg, and she heals him as well. Senshi congratulates him for defeating the red dragon, but he thinks it was all thanks to everyone playing their part. Chuck is relieved that everything worked out, and gives Laius his sword. but says they'll need to talk about what happened. They begin to open the dragon's belly and notice that it has a thick skin, realizing it will take time to reach the stomach. They dig their way in, and Marcel uses her magic to help with the dark, which reminds Senshi of his days in the mines. They rip the stomach out, but as they open it, they realize it's empty. Marcel doesn't believe it, and Lias is sure it's the same dragon they encountered before. They decide to look at the intestine, and Marcel realizes that there isn't a single bone inside. Lias wonders if the dragon digested faster because it was moving, but he remembers something and grabs another section of the dragon's body. He opens it up, explaining that dragons separate things that are hard to digest. He looks through and finds a hair, so they all start digging through, and they find Fallon's staff, while Lias becomes devastated when he finds her skull. Lias begins to gather her bones to take to the resurrection office, but Chuck notices that he's picking up monster bones, so he decides to help. Marcel advises them to stop, as she explains that the link between Fallon's soul and her body is weak, so they can't move her, because it would increase the chances of resurrection failure. Marcel thinks they need to revive her there, saying they will need fresh meat, since resurrection requires twice the calories of the damaged parts. Chuck thinks it's impossible to bring meat from the surface, but Marcel explains that they already have everything they need. He thinks it's wrong, reminding her that reviving isn't her specialty. So Marcel reveals that she studies ancient magic, but she never said it to anyone because she didn't want to scare them, thinking this is their best option. Senshi thinks dark magic is evil, but Marcel explains that magic doesn't have morality. Lias begs her to revive his sister, but Chuck thinks they're crazy and can't believe they want to use dragon meat. She explains they have no choice, so she makes a cut and draws her inscriptions, saying they need to reconstruct the skeleton, so Lias offers to assemble the monsters' bodies. The group prepares to assemble the skeletons, and Lias notes that the bones of 2 dogs have been mixed in, so they need to separate Fallon's bones. Marcel decides to start with the easier parts, so she takes the spine and ribs, while Lias explains that dog spines are different from humans, but the difficult part is the hands and feet. Marcel assembles the larger pieces first, and Lias shows her what he made, but Marcel explains that it's wrong. Lias finds it difficult to differentiate, so he asks for a hint, but Chuck tells him it's not a game. They finish assembling, and Lias finds his sister's skeleton beautiful, while Senshi praises her good calcium intake. Chuck wonders if the monsters will resurrect, but Marcel explains that only human souls are bound to the dungeon. She starts the ritual as blood flows, and it begins to cover the skeleton. The atmosphere changes as she continues reciting the spell, but she suddenly collapses, and they wonder if it worked. Lias goes to check on Fallon's body, and she suddenly gasps for air, coughing up the blood from her lungs, so he hugs her and brings her a blanket. He goes to wake Marcel, who wonders if it worked, so he confirms this, and she's overjoyed to see Fallon. She can't stop crying, and Chuck greets Fallon, introducing Senshi to her, but her stomach suddenly growls, so they decide it's time to eat. Fallon and Marcel take a bath, and Marcel is happy that everything worked out. But Fallon is embarrassed, because Marcel is helping her clean up, so Marcel explains that she just wanted to check if Fallon's body has been restored. But she realizes that Marcel looks pale, so she explains it's because she used all of her mana, saying she'll recover after a rest. Fallon suddenly grabs her hand and starts using magic, but Marcel pushes her away, and Fallon apologizes, saying she was trying to share her mana. Marcel tells her she also needs mana to recover, but she explains that she feels great, saying she has a ridiculous amount of power inside her. Fallon asks her what happened, and she wonders where Namari and Shiro are, saying she feels bad that they had to risk their lives to save her. She also remembers the magic circle and can't believe she made Marcel use something like that. But Marcel confronts her, telling her to stop, because now they can look back and laugh, since everything worked out. They don't be fine after they erase the circle, so they just need to think about returning to the surface. Chuck speaks with Lias, asking him if he knew Marcel could use dark magic. Lias remembers that she wanted to go to the dungeon to study it, but she never mentioned the details. Chuck thinks it's strange for an elf to risk her life exploring dungeons, because elves live comfortable lives. So he wonders if she's actually a dark elf, but Marcel appears behind him, saying she overheard him. He thinks dark magic is evil, reminding her that it's banned. but she explains that even healing magic can be used for torture, saying she wants to use dark magic to help people. But she also asks them to forget what she did, so he thinks she knows it's wrong, but he decides to let it go. Lias wonders where Senshi is, and Fallon reveals that she saw him carrying firewood, so Lias wonders if he plans to start a fire near the dragon. They realize he's in trouble since they cut the dragon's gas storage, knowing it's going to explode after Senshi starts a fire. So they run to him, and Lias tells him to stop, but he doesn't listen, and he appears to be caught in an explosion. But they realize that he's still alive, because Fallon used her magic to protect him. Marcel asks her how she was able to cast a spell without an incantation, so Fallon admits she just thought about protecting everyone. Senshi is still in shock, and Lias explains that he ignited the fuel which the dragon uses to breathe fire. He won't be able to take the meat out, because the dragon's body is still burning, so he decides to use the fire. He makes dough and rolls it out, putting toppings on it, and he uses the dragon's body as an oven. He cooks the meat from the dragon's tail, and after a few moments, he serves the meal to everyone. They're afraid to eat monsters in front of Fallon, but she takes the first bite, and she's delighted by how delicious it tastes, realizing it's her first meal since she got revived. They eat together, and Chuck tries to compare the dragon's taste to other monsters. They try to guess what it resembles, but Lias mentions that the meat is unlike anything they've tasted before, so they can only say it tastes like dragon, but they wonder why he's so excited. Marcel tries to tell Fallon, but Lias interrupts her, explaining that they've only eaten monsters along the way. Fallon suddenly becomes excited and asks about their taste, but Marcel realizes this is the worst outcome. Lias talks about monster cuisine, telling Fallon they even managed to taste living armor. Chuck thinks it's a good opportunity to share his secret with the others, so Lias shows Kensuke to them. Fallon finds it cute, trying to touch it, but it hides, and it jumps at Lias, who explains he took it until he got a new sword. But it's convenient because it can sense monsters. Chuck tells him not to hide secrets from them, since trust is very important for their business. He asks what Lias will do with it, so he explains he could kill it by drowning, but he's afraid it would rot inside the sword. He thought it would be harmless at first, but now he realizes it's unpredictable, so he asks Fallon if she wants to eat it, and she's excited to taste it. They take a look around the house, and find it strange that the doors are covered. Fallon finds a shy ghost girl and apologizes for intruding, saying they'll leave after resting. They prepare to sleep, and Marcel thinks it's like old times, so she clings to Fallon, happy they're together again. Fallon gets up to say goodnight to Lias, and discovers his new scar, so she heals him. She's concerned about him, but he scolds her, because her recklessness got them into trouble. He asks her not to do it again, before hugging her, and she promises to be more careful. Meanwhile, someone notices the dead dragon, and we see that it's a dark elf. Senshi prepares the dragon meat while everyone is sleeping, but Fallon suddenly wakes up, and goes out the window. She walks up to the dragon when someone calls for her, and the dark elf asks her what's wrong with her, reminding her about her mission to search for the king. Lias suddenly wakes up to the noise of Kensuke falling, and realizes Fallon isn't in bed, so he wakes Marcel, asking her about Fallon, but she doesn't know anything. Senshi hasn't seen her either, and Lias thinks she went out the window, so he goes outside, and sees the dragon's body melting. Lias sees Fallon screaming, talking about searching for King Delgal, so he becomes confused, but the dark elf suddenly appears. He explains that everything in the world belongs to the king, and he calls Lias a thief, saying he saw Lias in the paintings. Lias remembers him, and realizes he's the lunatic magician, but there's suddenly an explosion, as Marcel arrives with the others, threatening to kill him, but he acts hostile, calling them usurpers. Lias tries to speak with Fallon, but she attacks him, throwing him away, so Chuck runs to help. The lunatic magician uses his grimoire, and he begins his incantation, as the dragon's blood starts to take shape, so Marcel realizes he's using ancient magic. He orders the dragons to attack, and Marcel falls to the ground. She doesn't have the spells to counter his attack, so she decides to rewrite it. They advance on her, but she uses her staff to cancel the spell, so the elf becomes surprised. She can understand ancient magic, so she can eliminate the dragons, but she finds it too much to handle. She tries to speak with the lunatic magician, but the ground opens up, and she falls with the others. The elf closes his book, and turns to Fallon, but realizes that ghosts are protecting her. But he passes through them, and asks them not to be afraid, since the traitors are gone, and the king will return soon. He calls Fallon a dragon, and wonders why she's in that form. He finds it inconvenient, so he decides to give her a new form, covering her body in blood, and ordering her to do her job. Marcel uses her magic to create light, and they wonder where they've fallen. The walls suddenly start to move, and they realize they're going to be crushed. Chuck looks for an exit, and asks Marcel if she has any magic that can help them, but she denies this, and the walls are about to crush them to death. She thinks they're going to die, and no one will be able to find them inside the stones, but she can't believe she's going to die after finding Fallon. Ghosts suddenly grab her, pulling her away, and everyone realizes there's an opening on the wall, so they decide to go through it. They arrive at a house, and Chuck feels they need to get out of there, but Marcel explains she can't move from exhaustion, and they suddenly see a group of ghosts surrounding them. Chuck thinks they're going to die, but the ghosts disappear, and he wonders why all this is happening. He asks Senshi to wake Lias up, while he checks the area, but a group of orcs appears, so he becomes terrified. The orcs capture them, and their leader appears, introducing herself as Lead, and saying she's going to kill them. But Senshi asks her if she's the sister of Chief Zon, explaining they're fulfilling a request from him. So the orcs start to smell him, and realize he's the vegetable seller. Lead asks him what he's doing there, so Senshi explains how Zon asked him to kill the dragon, and she realizes they helped her village, so she thanks them for getting rid of it. She decides to prepare an orc mixture, putting it in Lias's mouth, and Marcel is terrified as she watches everything, and tries to explain she's just out of magic. But she loses consciousness, and Chuck explains they were attacked by the lunatic magician, wondering if Lead knows anything about him. She can't believe they encountered him, explaining that he rules the dungeon. She reveals that he takes care of adventurers who delve too deep and can kill any creature with his grimoire, so Chuck realizes he's a threat, thinking they need to leave the dungeon. Chuck wonders why he appeared, so Lead explains that he controls a few monsters and gets angry if someone kills them. She reveals that her brother didn't want to fight the red dragon because he could anger the lunatic magician, and Chuck curses Zahn for not telling them. He realizes Lias and Marcel will want to go after Fallon again, and he needs to stop them. Chuck suggests telling them that Fallon left the dungeon, but Senshi doesn't want to deceive them. Chuck explains they'll die if they continue, and there's no point in staying just to die. He asks Lead to accompany him and show him the way to retrieve their belongings, but she refuses, saying she dislikes cowards. But Senshi also asks her to take him there and tells Chuck that one of them must stay with Lias and Marcel. Lead can't say no to him, so she accompanies Chuck, asking him if his group got separated from a companion. So he explains they were caught in a trap, while Fallon stayed with the lunatic magician, saying they don't know if she's alive. A ghost suddenly appears, and he passes through it, as Lead explains there's no need to fear, because the ghosts in the area are still sane, saying they only appear when they want to be seen. So she decides to follow him, but Chuck doesn't like the idea. They arrive where they face the lunatic magician, and Chuck wonders what happened to the dragon. Lead thinks the lunatic magician made the dragon disappear, and she notices that there was an explosion, so Chuck explains they accidentally set the dragon's fuel on fire. She wonders how they survived, so he explains that one of them used a protective spell in time. She thinks he's lucky to have someone like that in their group, but he says she didn't know she could use the magic. Lead asks him how they defeated the red dragon, so he explains that Lias jumped on the dragon's chest while it was distracted and managed to kill it. She thinks he must be brave, but Chuck considers him reckless. He remembers Shuro and Namari leading the group, thinking he should have done the same. He explains that they healed and ate the dragon afterward, and Lead thinks it's a good reward for their victory. They stop for Chuck to gather his things, while Lead asks him how they survived against the lunatic magician. So he explains that Marcel was able to cancel his spells, but she also used forbidden magic, so he's unsure what might happen now. They make their way back, and Chuck is upset, thinking the others are fools, since they don't listen to reason. Lead thinks it's no reason to deceive them, but he explains that he has no problem lying if it gets them to the surface, and he admits he's a coward, saying his life always comes first. But Lead asks him to stop deceiving himself, and just admit that he doesn't want to see them die. Chuck suddenly bumps into Kensuk, as he wonders what it's doing there, and he notices a trail of blood. They return to the house, but they see Lias and Senshi arguing. Chuck tells Lias to rest, but he wants to find Fallon, so he tells Lias to calm down, explaining that they can't keep searching like this, because they're going to end up dead. So he begs Lias to be strong and return to the surface. He says he doesn't want to lose all three of them, so he suggests notifying the island's lord about the lunatic magician and getting help. Senshi supports Chuck and reveals they're running out of spices, so they should restock their supplies to cook something nice for Fallon. Lead says that Zahn will return because the red dragon is gone, and she also promises to help them when they come back. Lias agrees to Chuck's plan, and he apologizes for worrying them, saying it's time to head back. They have a beautiful moment together, and on the other side, Tansu revives Cobra's party. He explains they would have become fish food if they had stayed in the water, so he should thank whoever pulled them out. Kuro sniffs to find out who it was, and discovers it was the same people who stole their treasure, while Cobra recalls they were attacked by fishmen. He looks at Namari, and thinks he's seen her before, but she leaves with Tansu. Mick realizes that Lias's party stole their food, and his companions, Daya and Home, wonder why they only took the food this time, so Rin thinks they need to be taught a lesson. Mick asks Cobra what to do, but he suggests returning to the surface, saying they're out of provisions, so they should acknowledge defeat for now. Home and Daya agree to follow him, but Rin thinks they should still look for the thieves later, so he gives her his word. They head towards the surface, but Cobra notices that his friends have disappeared, so he draws his sword, and he realizes that he's surrounded by fishmen. One of them charges at him, so he blocks the attack, and he sees a fishman running away. He notes that the fishman's attacks seem familiar, and he realizes it's Daya, so Cobra knocks her down, telling her it's just an illusion. So she calms down, and Cobra guesses the confused fishman is Kuro, and the other one is Home, as he notes that Mick was the one that ran away. He knows the biggest threat is Rin, and he sees her chanting, so he runs to her, and realizes there's only one way to peacefully interrupt the enchantment. So he kisses her, leaving Rin in shock. He thinks it's a shame she's in the form of a monster, and decides to dispel the mist, so he takes down the fishmen around them, wondering who's behind the illusion. He sees one of them observing him from a distance, thinking he's the one responsible for the fog, so Cobra attacks him, and the fog clears, as the mage surrenders. Rin remembers the enemy leader, knowing he's the man who resurrected them before. Cobra realizes they're reviving bodies because of the island's subsidy, and they thought Cobra's party was weak. So the men followed them, waiting for them to die, so that the men can earn money by reviving them. But Tansu arrived first, so they decided to kill Cobra's party before they could return to the surface. The man explains he's almost right, as the original plan was to act after they found the people who robbed them, but they were defeated too quickly. The man suggests taking his companions to a resurrection station and splitting the money, but Cobra explains that they're still alive. So the man gives him a trident, saying they will convince the authorities that his companions were attacked by fishmen. So Cobra agrees and prepares to attack. But he kills the man instead, and his group is happy with his decision as he eliminates the thieves. He thinks it's easier to kill humans, since everyone has similar weaknesses. He asks Kuro to find Mick, and Rin wonders what to do with the mage, who starts begging for his life. But Cobra explains that thieves make people want to leave the island, so he can't forgive him, and Cobra kills him. They throw the bodies into the water, and Cobra apologizes to Rin for kissing her earlier, but she pretends not to know what he's talking about. He thinks they're progressing slowly, and remembers how the island's director only cares about the treasures and items from the dungeon. So if the dungeon is fully explored, no one will want to enter it, and the monsters will take over the island. So he wants to break the curse soon, as he can't allow monsters to enter the world. Mick found valuable items in the bags of the body rescuers, but Cobra decides to only take the food, reminding Mick that they aren't thieves. So they gather the food, and give thanks for the meal. They realize that body rescuers make a fortune, and Mick wonders if the Lord of the Island can't discover their scheme. Cobra believes they have connections, but Mick thinks the Island Lord is incompetent. Cobra explains that the Lord is useful for keeping elves out of the dungeon, and he notes that it's rare to have an elf in a party, so it will be easy to identify Elias's group. Mick wonders if it's Donnie and Fioni, but Cobra reminds him that they're novices, so they're still on the 3rd floor. He also finds it unusual to only have 4 people, and asks Rin to analyze the ghost counter spell charm. She's surprised that he's still wearing it, and she explains that it seems to have come from a textbook, so it might be made by an elf student from a magic school. Cobra starts to get interested, and thinks he knows the group. But Rin asks him to tell, and he thinks they're the group of Lias and Fallon, since Fallon went to a magic school, and he remembers an elf that seemed to be her childhood friend. Home reminds him that the siblings are tall, but Kuro only smelled one tall person, so Cobra suggests that one of them got lost. He also saw Namari, the dwarf who was part of Lias's party, so he believes part of the group had a disagreement about the rescue, and that's why they're traveling with fewer people. Mick mentions that Kuro also smelled a dwarf, and wonders how they would still have a dwarf if Namari left. Cobra explains they could have hired one, and thinks about the members of their party. He mentions that Shuro and the 2 siblings are tall, so 2 of them must have left the group. Daya recognizes Namari's name, knowing she's the daughter of the arms trader. Her father controlled the weapon trade on the island, but the Lord found out he was embezzling money, so he suddenly disappeared. After that incident, nobody decided to follow in her father's footsteps, and the dwarf's reputation became worse because of him. Mick also recognizes Chuck, thinking he's a greedy man who tried to get people to join a guild so that he can get a percentage on every contract. Mick explains that Chuck tried to convince him to join, but he didn't want to be part of it, knowing he would be reprimanded if the guild found out he hired a kobold. Mick asks Rin if she knows Shuro, since he's from a region, but she explains that not all Easterners know each other, and Shuro wasn't born on her island. Cobra remembers he came with other Easterners, but joined Lias's party alone, thinking he was in the dungeon to test his skills. Cobra keeps thinking about it, and Mick finds it scary how much he analyzes people. But he explains he's excited, as he's wanted to see their true colors for a long time. He remembers that Lias made a fortune with the gold peelers, but he shared most of the profits with his companions who were injured in the dungeons. But they continued taking money from him even after they healed, and they never returned to adventuring because they're now selling smuggled items. Cobra thinks Lias's party could be evil, so he doesn't want the power of the ancient elves to fall into their hands. The others agree, saying Kabru is the only one capable of leading, and they continue their journey, but they're attacked by blade fish. Kabru tells them not to get distracted, and a sea serpent suddenly appears. The mages can't use magic with the rough sea, so Kabru realizes he needs to handle the situation, but a girl appears above him and throws a bomb at the serpent. Another girl strikes it, knocking it back, and Shuro slices off its head. Kabru is confused, as a woman named Maizuru approaches Shuro, calling him master, but he ignores her, and his group realizes he's still in love with Fallon. Kabru thanks them for saving his group, so he approaches Shuro, asking if he's looking for Fallon. So he becomes surprised, wondering if he knows where she is, and he offers to help him find her. We learn that 2 days have passed since Lias agreed to leave the dungeon, but his party is lost, and they can't find their way back as they start to starve once again. Chuck is certain that the wall wasn't there before, so Marcel explains that the lunatic magician must be altering the dungeon's layout to make them walk in circles. Chuck tries to climb the wall, but they are almost seen. They decide to keep going, but Senshi notices they're walking too much. He thinks it's a shame to not provide a decent meal for the group, and he becomes desperate thinking Chuck needs food to grow. Chuck smells some flowers, so they think there's water nearby and run towards it. They reach a garden, and Chuck sees some women, but Senshi covers his eyes because he's too young. The women run to attack, but Lias kills one and she releases pollen, so he explains that they're dryad flowers. They start breathing in the pollen, and it triggers their allergies. Chuck covers himself from the pollen, but the dryad attacks him. He barely dodges with Senshi, and Lias is out of action, so Chuck guides Senshi to take the sword and swing behind him, but more pollen sprays out, and it gets into Chuck's eyes. The other dryad attacks them, and he tells Senshi to run, but Senshi thinks he should protect Chuck since he's an adult. Chuck uses his other sense to see the dryad, and they manage to take it down together. Marcel wonders how to repair her staff, and suddenly sees the state of the trio, so she realizes they fought dryads. Lias finds some weird fruits, and Marcel wonders if black magic can reverse time, but Chuck tells her to stop joking. He finds something, and Lias explains that they're dryad buds, so they decide to take some. Chuck also finds a mandrake, and Senshi thinks it's a good harvest, so he starts to prepare some food. He makes a jack-o'-lantern soup and sauteed dryad buds with cheese. He serves it first to Marcel to help recover her mana, and she admits that it's great. Lias is impressed by the taste of vegetables with cheese, but Chuck is still worried about how they'll escape. Marcel explains that the way back is still open because closing it seals the magical flow. She reveals there's a pattern behind the changes, so they decide to note everything down. Marcel suggests treating their wounds, but she wants Lias to do it to save mana. She knows Fallon taught him the basics of magic, and she won't be able to protect everyone from the lunatic magician, so he needs to help out. Marcel asks him to heal her ear, but she scolds him for being careless. He explains that he didn't want to touch her in a strange way, but she says that being shy won't help him and shows him how to do it. They recite the spell, but suddenly she pushes him away because her ear is itching and she notices the scar is gone. Lias points out that her ear is bleeding, but she assures him that it's normal for a first attempt. She suggests healing Senshi, but he seems nervous about the idea. He lies down, and Marcel uses the dryad branches to repair her staff. Senshi feels embarrassed about Lias touching him, but Marcel insists he shouldn't be ashamed. They suddenly hear a loud noise and notice a wall moving. They decide to check it out, but Lias feels dizzy and collapses, so Marcel explains it's because he used his mana for the first time. They proceed without him, and Lias lies delirious on the ground, seeing ghosts begging him for help. The path changes, and Chuck tries to understand the pattern, but they notice the ground rising, so they jump down, but a monster appears behind them. They start running, realizing it's a cockatrice which has a paralyzing venom. They hide inside a house, but the snake sees them, and Senshi explains that the cockatrice has heat vision, so they can't hide. He suggests distracting the two heads, so Marcel creates an explosion. This attracts its attention, but Senshi misses his attack. The cockatrice focuses on Marcel, and the snake head bites her, but she explodes its neck, while Senshi kills the chicken. Chuck notices she was bitten, so they show Lias. He mentions he knows what to do, and tells her to sit with her arms tucked in. He thinks she's ready to turn into stone, and she gets angry at him for not helping, but she suddenly turns to stone, and they think she's stuck in a bad position that could easily break. Lias explains that they can wait for the venom's effect to wear off on its own, and since she's an elf, she might recover faster, but they can also find medicinal herbs and try a healing spell since she taught him how to read her magic book. They think it's worth a try and look for some herbs, but they discover it takes up to 10 years for her to recover naturally. Chuck worries she might fall, so Senshi has an idea and uses her as a weight to press down to ferment some vegetables and marinate meat. She becomes more stable, but still looks like a totem. They keep trying to cure her, and on the third day Chuck finds a herb, and Lias uses the healing spell he learned. She suddenly returns to normal, waking up confused, and Senshi notes that the food is also ready. She's surprised to learn that she turned into a statue for 3 days, and feels guilty for delaying them, but scolds them for using her as a weight. Chuck discovers the changing patterns of the dungeon, so they follow him through the city and find the house where they stayed after defeating the dragon. He worries that others might find the trail of blood on the ground and thinks of Fallon, but the blood has vanished. They realize the crack was from when the dragon fell, and Lias goes to check it, but something inside tells him that the magical eye is watching them. He gets scared, but the others don't understand what he's talking about, so he wonders if he's hearing things. They hear the sound of wings, but don't know where to hide. But Marcel suddenly has an idea, and throws Chuck into the wall, which begins to absorb him. The blood dragon passes by, and they come out of the wall. Chuck is confused, but Lias realizes that they're cleaners. He explains that they clean the dungeon and repair the damage it suffers, so Marcel realized the wall wasn't ready yet. Lias notices the scratches are being repaired, and Chuck spots tiny creatures crawling on the floor. Lias explains that they devour debris and use their secretion to restore the dungeon to its original state. Chuck is relieved that the bloodstains disappeared, and he decides to keep moving before the dungeon changes again. After a while, they arrive at the stairs to the next floor. Lias and Senshi prepare to leave, so they make a meal, but Marcel thought they were talking about the frog outfit, so Lias reveals there are no tentacles on this level, and she gets angry. Senshi begins cooking the grains, and he cuts the cockatrice meat along with the dried leaves. He pours everything into a brick and then prepares